Good evening.
Good evening. You
Good
are
evening.
live here, courtside with Lawman.
And Carmen B.
Yes, and we have been on a bit of a sabbatical because of a couple of issues. Lawman was
Health
recuperating,
issues.
and then I was unavailable. But we are back, and we are here to talk about criminal justice and social justice issues that affect the public.
And if you have any questions regarding the court system, how things are being done on your behalf or on the behalf of a loved one or a family, friend member, we're here to talk about that too. Any questions about the criminal justice system that you may have, even when it comes to jury duty and things like that when you're a witness. Also, anything that we talk about is not creating an attorney client relationship between you and myself or Carmen. And we do want you, though, to contact us with questions and ideas and thoughts. We have a potpourri, I guess, of things tonight, really. Um, I think there's been a lot going on since since we've been gone. A terrible lot. But I guess let's start with what is a common theme that we seem to always run into, and that's police versus citizens. Now, I will start off by saying that you've got to notice that raid, or at least I should say, a search warrant executed in Mar-a-Lago, has caused people concern. And the concern is that now the FBI needs to be defunded. The law enforcement wing is harassing people and doing things politically and against the law, and all kinds of allegations about the FBI and law enforcement. And it just seems so similar to complaints that are made about local law enforcement agencies against citizens, especially citizens of color.
So, are you talking about what happened with our former president and his complaints about how he was treated, how his residence was treated?
And
Um,
and this is a witch hunt, and there's no basis for it,
but
and
he didn't see it that way when those things were happening to regular citizens.
correct.
So, apparently, it's only when it happens to someone else personally and directly is it a problem. But if it is happening every day in communities of African Americans and Latinos, that is apparently perfectly fine.
Well, it's that law enforcement are doing abusive tactics and things in real life. But here, it's not just him. It is his pundits, his people on TV, his third party individuals
Who are
who are
complaining?
complaining about law enforcement and talking about defunding the FBI. Now, on the one hand, I'll agree with the fact that the FBI has not been very kind to African Americans throughout history. So if you want to get rid of them, okay. But then if you do that, you better get rid of all of them, every law enforcement. And that's not going to happen. But it's just odd and ironic that that people are calling law enforcement names, and they're claiming that they have these unlawful intent going after Mr. Trump. Now, I'll tell you something else that has popped up in that. But they had a warrant. They had to get it signed by a judge. They had to articulate facts that would lead them to believe that items of evidence would be in that home. That something that might evidence a crime would be in that home. And that's why they executed a search warrant. And search warrants can go into safes or other closed areas, locked areas. They can look practically everywhere. They're usually only limited by night, the knock and notice, something like that. So,
But before a search warrant is executed, that search warrant, there has been an affidavit presented to a judge. The judge has reviewed it and determined that there is a sufficient basis for that search warrant to issue. Now, um, that brings us sort of to the Breonna Taylor incident because finally,
hmm,
the officers who murdered her in her home have been charged. They have been charged federally.
right. Which, once again, a wing of our criminal justice system that gets to operate under a different set of laws. It's similar to the Aubrey case, where they were sentenced federally here recently, but you can bring an action in both venues. And this action,
when we say bring an action, it is the decision of the prosecuting attorney
yeah,
as to whether or not they're going to file
charges or an indictment in federal court.
Yes.
Exactly. Now here, the indictment in federal court is coming against the officers because locally, the county, the state refused to do so.
I think they did file against one of the officers, but not related to Breonna.
Right. It was shooting another guy or putting others in danger or something like that.
It was the
his
incident.
Own cops in danger.
It was the people that lived in the apartment, I think either next door or
across
above.
The wall,
but
even, yeah.
At any rate, he was still found. I believe he was acquitted in relation to those charges, and no charges were filed in relation to the killing of Breonna in the state. But now federally, they will face charges. Now we will see what the outcome of that is.
And usually that's an investigation by the FBI, and on that level. So, there's another incident that we had that came out. There's one other thing that came from this, because the search warrant is all about the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which says that we should be free from searches and seizures. And those searches and seizures that we should be free from shall be just unreasonable searches and seizures. And that's the real key word there, is unreasonable behavior. Now, the Fifth Amendment kicked in this whole thing when Donald Trump was asked to come in and say some things. I believe he was subpoenaed even to come in and talk. And Donald Trump exercised his Fifth Amendment right not to testify. So he took the Fifth, the same Fifth that he talked about others taking, which meant that they must be guilty if they would take the Fifth. And he said that repeatedly, that's how he felt about the Fifth Amendment. If you got to take the Fifth Amendment, you must be guilty. What do you got to hide? Now, it just goes to show that the law applies to everybody. We tell you take the Fifth so that you don't incriminate yourself, so that you don't say anything that's going to harm you because you don't know what they know. And now, here's your best example of why you do that. Here's a guy who has a tendency to talk. He has a tendency to brag and say a little too much. So when it came down to it and they said, now come on in and tell us what you know about the crime, he decided to take the Fifth, just like any good citizen would. I'm stressing this is why we take the Fifth. We are living under the same set of laws. The Fifth Amendment is that powerful. And you see him exercise it once he gets the opportunity to do so.
It seems to depend on who's being impacted as to what his view is regarding the law and whether or not someone should take advantage of a constitutional right that is afforded them. Asserting the Fifth Amendment does not in any way, shape, or form mean that you are guilty. It doesn't even mean that you have some information to incriminate yourself. What it is a protection, because you as a citizen don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of the law.
And law enforcement can lie to you, can give you false facts in order to see what you know.
And we know that there are people who have given false confessions based on false information that the law enforcement officer has provided to them. They are allowed to lie. They can tell you that they have your fingerprints when they don't. They can tell you that they have DNA evidence when they don't. They can tell you that other people that they have interviewed have incriminated you.
That's right.
Pointed you out as being the person, even when that is a lie.
Right.
And those sorts of lies may impact what the person says, may cause them to falsely admit to a crime that they did not commit. And one of the more egregious circumstances that we've seen in recent times were the young men that were accused of the rape that happened in Central Park.
Where Donald Trump went off wanting to kill the guys.
Children, because they were children.
Right.
So just goes to show an example.
Yeah, it does. You know, all of that should anger Americans, just like people trying to throw away constitutional law that has been present, people who speak against the government and try to take it down from some falsified election, um, tampering allegations, and things like that. Which is why we have to be diligent as citizens and know our rights and know the law, um, in order to protect ourselves too. Because you're seeing it on a grand stage where this man now is trying to protect himself. And this is why we stress, because also, look, sometimes you can say things that may not be an admission to a crime, but it may be enough to provide some circumstantial evidence for them. And you're not even telling the truth, or you're scared, or you feel something and you're not telling the truth, which is why shutting up is the best thing. So it's just ironic that we would see this play out with him as the example. But I think people saw it coming a while back.
Well, and I think there have been other instances of him where if the view is something that is favorable to him, that is what he is going to proceed with. So, for example, when his former attorney was providing information about him, he then referred to him as being a snitch. Well, wait, I thought we don't want to call people snitches because we want people to be forthcoming with evidence. But because that person was forthcoming with evidence that particularly related to him, he referred to that individual as a snitch.
Correct. So, it's that old, if the shoe fits on you, you're going to wear it, I guess, and stuff, right? So, but, and now let's stretch off into the other incident that we were talking about beforehand. An incident where a couple were in a park in Atlanta, and there had been probably, I guess, some violence in the park, and they had revoked the rules in terms of curfew as to how late you can be in the park or where you can be in the park. Now,
And these individuals were not even from
from
that
there,
area, so they had no idea about what the time periods were. And I believe the gentleman expressed the fact that there were no signs
correct.
that they saw with the hours that the officer was indicating.
Because what happens is we have this couple, African Americans, in a park, and they're by their car, and they are hugging. They look. It's like if you would go to the park, like a lover's lane type of thing. You maybe walk around with your mate, but they're hugging at their car, and the officer comes up and lets them know that there's a new ordinance. You can't be here. Um, and he goes right to, I've got to write you a citation. Now, understand this is not it's been made before. It's not a felony, a misdemeanor. It's a county ordinance or a city ordinance that they violated. So you can't go to jail or anything, really. I mean, really pay a fine. So he's going to write them a ticket, and he does so. Now, he writes the guy a ticket, and the guy signs his ticket. The female, before she is signing her ticket, she wants to know the officer's name, badge numbers, things like that, because she feels he is not within his right to do what he's doing. So she refuses to sign the ticket.
And I believe she asked, or I recall specifically that the gentleman asked, well, what happens if I
Yeah.
don't sign the ticket?
Right. And the officer explained that, well, I'm going to have to arrest you.
And that actually is not true. Because number one, officers have a lot of discretion in who they actually decide to arrest. Even when they contact someone and that person is committing a crime,
Right.
if that crime is a low level, is a misdemeanor,
Yeah.
they can decide. Let's say they're in a state where marijuana is illegal, and they find someone who has a small amount of marijuana. They can take that marijuana and say, "Hey, I'm gonna dispose of this. Throw this away. I'm giving you a warning. Get out of here. Don't let me see you doing this kind of thing again."
Right.
And they can let the person go. The same is when an officer stops someone who's committing a traffic violation. They can let them off with a warning. They can say, "Hey, I don't know if you noticed, but you were going 5, 10 miles above the speed limit or 20 miles above the speed limit. You may not have been paying attention. I just want to call it to your attention. I'm going to let it slide this time. Just be more cognizant of your speed. And they can let the person go on, right? So they are not required to arrest, to issue a ticket, to do that when it's a violation of something minor, which being in a park after whatever the new prohibited hours are is something that is minor.
Extremely.
It's extremely minor. No one's being injured, no one's being harmed by their presence at that park. He
Right.
didn't have to even write them a citation. And
Correct.
actually, even if you don't sign the citation, the officer can actually write refused
It's
on
a
there.
sign.
He
Right.
has all of your identifying information because they both
Yes.
provided their identification, and he simply could have given them the ticket, wrote that they refused to sign it, and that could have been the end of the incident, or that she refused to sign it because
Right.
the gentleman signed his ticket.
And you would think he would ask them to just leave. And they probably, more than likely, would have left because their first response was, well, we didn't know. Okay,
Yes, we're
sorry.
not from this
Right.
area.
They didn't fight with him or argue with him about whether or not they could stay or not.
Yes.
Now, what it led to is a confrontation, and he decided and he made a decision as an officer that he was going to handcuff her and arrest her.
And this is where it comes in where we hear this information that officers are supposed to be trained to de-escalate situations. And at some point when he tells her that he is going to arrest her, she says, "Okay, officer, I will sign the ticket."
Right.
And he says, "No, nope, nope, you're going to jail now."
You've made your decision. It's too late.
Except that it wasn't too late. What had changed? They were still there in the same location. All she needed to do was pick up the pen, sign the ticket, and they could have been able to go on their way. But the officer chose to escalate it. There are some officers who believe that if you don't follow their instructions to the T immediately, that they have the power to just then there's all bets are off and they're going to physically manhandle you, whether you are a woman or a man, and take you to jail. And that is what we saw occurring here. He's telling her, "Put your hands behind your back." She's saying, "Officer, I'm telling you, I will sign the ticket. I'll sign the ticket, officer. I'll sign the ticket." The gentleman who is with her is saying she's going to sign the ticket. There's no need to grab her.
Right.
And because the officer then starts grabbing her hand and trying to handcuff her. And she's like, "Please, I'm telling you, I will sign the ticket." "Nope, nope, you're being arrested." And he ends up kind of
Yeah.
throwing her to the
To the
ground
ground.
and handcuffing her. And the entire time, the gentleman is asking him and telling him, "This is not necessary. You don't have to do that to her. She is going to sign the ticket."
Correct. So what happens, of course, is she goes to jail, and she gets out, and she gets her lawyer, and her lawyers are going to um, bring forth her rights as it is in that particular case. But what it really, really shows is this humanity thing that seems to be missing. Because, first of all, what if it's two or three young juvenile white guys who are just drinking a little alcohol in a park? Like Carm said, look, you probably could arrest them for, having alcohol as a minor, but more than likely they pour out the beer, tell them don't be doing this, and send them home. You see, so I mean that is the way we would visualize that scene working out. But here,
Especially when someone tells you that they're not from the area and they
right,
didn't know.
correct, and this was a change in the law. So even if I was from the area, I may not have heard that they have changed that curfew time.
Yes, because apparently there were no new postings with the time. So the
Right.
only way for anyone to know would be an officer or someone else coming up and telling them.
Correct. So,
I do
oh,
want to state this. One that video was sent to us by viewer Warren Mack, and we certainly appreciate you sending us that video. Um, but the officer involved in this incident was African American. The couple was African American. So we want to be clear in saying we're not just talking about white officers who
Right.
mistreat citizens. We also want to address African American officers who mistreat citizens because apparently sometimes with certain officers there's just something about that badge that makes them feel all powerful and that they are going to force you to yield to that power in whatever way they can. I will also note that during that exchange, he took out his taser, and the
Oh yeah.
gentleman is begging him, "Please don't taser. It's not necessary. It's not necessary." And she is actually calling out for our Lord Jesus Christ. So she's not physically trying to hit the officer.
Correct. She's on the ground, in
Yeah,
fact, and he's on top of her.
yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, so it brings back now training, humanity. What kind of mindset do we have as officers? Are you, does the power of being an officer, is it so great that you must exercise that power whenever you get the opportunity to do so? Because, other people would think the people who have power, you have to have what? Restraint with that power. The more power you're given, the more restraint you should have, especially when we're talking about individuals who are armed, who can and will execute people.
We've seen it,
Yes.
and it is continuing to happen.
Right. So, it brings up the same thing over and over again, which we know means that we're crazy because we don't ever get any kind of addressing that issue. We can talk about training, defunding, doing all of this stuff. But what does it really come down to? It comes down to the power in the hand of an officer at that particular time on the street and how they want to exercise it.
Well,
And this was probably a young officer. I mean, I would just guess this was a younger officer because
I don't know because
Yeah.
the officer has
Yeah.
yet to be identified. The incident happened in Atlanta,
right,
and actually the viewer indicated that Atlanta would now be off of his visiting list of places that he would like to go. And my response to that is, if Atlanta is off the list, then everywhere is
it's
in
off the
America
list.
is going to be off the list
That's right.
because it isn't just happening in one place. And until officers are held accountable for this kind of misconduct,
Right.
it is going to continue to happen. We knew, I think, at least Lawman and I knew that defunding was not going to occur.
Right.
And in fact, what has really happened as an increase in funding,
Right.
and not just locally, statewide and federally. I
Yeah.
believe Biden has
Everybody's
given
giving
more
some money.
funding to law enforcement.
Right.
So it's somewhat of a kick in the face.
Yeah.
I don't think we expected them to defund and get rid of officers. What we want is officers who are better trained, and maybe officers who are also psychologically evaluated for how they will behave in certain scenarios.
Correct. I mean, you bring up a couple of things. Where is money going then, if not for training, and who's overseeing that kind of thing? And the
Well,
next. Oh, go ahead.
We know that a lot of the money again goes to the militarization
Yeah.
of law enforcement.
So more weapons, more tools of the trade, so to speak, to use.
To be used against
Right.
the citizen population.
And
Now,
there's
to be clear, we are not against officers.
Right.
We believe as a civilized society, we do need law enforcement,
exactly
but we need a properly trained law enforcement.
the right mindset. And it seems, and I mean this. Now we're going back to back 2 years, 3 years. We're going back to what we saw and stuff about police officers and the organization. The what?
Oh, I
Is
was
it
just going to say we do have some comments.
Okay, yeah.
We need a viewer commented that they
Background
definitely need a background check on cops, and they actually are supposed to do
Yeah.
a very detailed background check on officers before they become officers. But I think not only that, but I think it also needs to continue. There needs to be some additional evaluation that occurs while the person is on the force, because you can have people who appear normal on paper, for lack of a better term, but who harbor certain attitudes, shall we say, against members of the population.
Right. But and I was going to say, look, here's the thing. How do you teach the officers compassion? How do you teach that? You know, there's something within the institution, in the office itself. There's something there, the environment, the culture. There is something there, because here's the problem: officers do misconduct like this all the time. This should be a firing offense for this officer, but they probably won't get fired. And in fact, if they fired him, they'll go to the next office, the next agency, and probably get hired. They were trying to stop that by at least bringing forth that kind of thing, where there's some things where officers, that if they do that, they cannot be officers anymore. We're saying that you just can't be a police cop or a cop anymore. That's it.
Yes, we have another comment from another viewer that says Colorado took action against an officer for abusive behavior and action against another officer for failing to intervene.
Report. Right.
And that is what should occur.
Exactly.
And I will note that sometimes that does happen, but there are far more times where there are instances of misconduct where the officer is not penalized, continues to remain an officer, is promoted. There was an instance here in Sacramento, I don't know if you recall, where there was an officer who pulled, actually didn't pull a young man over, but a young man turned into I believe, like a gas station and parked. And then the officers contacted him and said that he didn't use his signal when he turned in, and then continued to make up other things that yes. And as it turns out, their body cameras and their in-car cameras showed the truth of what happened. The fact that the turn signal was used to make the turn. So there was absolutely no basis for stopping him. That officer did get fired. Now, there's another officer that I know of, and this was in the B, who actually punched a kid who was in the hospital. When I say kid, I mean a 17-year-old, a child, punched that person while that person was in the hospital receiving hospital treatment because that person didn't want to give him their phone. That officer did not get fired.
So think about in the situations where, in the first one that you did, where there was other officers who, they also faked the report. That was one of the biggest things. They literally had to get together after that and fake the report. And they were found, it was found to be not true, thank goodness. I mean, because of cameras and things like that.
I'm only aware of the one officer having been fired. I don't know of any
but I think what happened was
outcome to the other officers.
Correct. And I don't think anything happened. But it was an incident that seemed to be kind of common, because they learned that they had all these prior drafts of reports. They had other computers that they were using, not the department ones. So it seemed to be common practice.
I'm going to say, with that officer, it wasn't just that incident. They then went back and looked at that officer's history and her involvement in other incidents as well. And I believe there was a 38-page letter defining and discussing all the various incidents that were going to be the basis of her termination.
So her behavior, the bad behavior of cops, seems to be supported by the institution, and the institution pushes them continually through their office. They'll never get fired. They'll never leave. And if they want to leave and have to go, then what's going to happen? Well, they'll go, and that won't follow them and taint them. We won't know that they're on our streets with that kind of history.
And that, again, is one of the reasons why you need to be in contact with your representatives, your legislators, and letting them know what you want in terms of laws. Because just because something is the law at this time doesn't mean that it has to continue that way.
Right.
The fact that officers, when complaints are made against them, that those complaints disappear after 5 years. Why does that happen?
Right.
When someone has a criminal record, it doesn't disappear after 5 years and it
That's right.
follows them forever.
Used against them
Yes.
affirmatively.
Well, we are at the end of another courtside show. We would like to let our viewers know that we are considering changing the date and the time that we do the show. We know that Fridays are usually times when people are probably spending time with family, having dinner. And so we are contemplating changing the time to, or changing the day to perhaps Sundays. We would like to hear from viewers as to what you think the best day would be for you. Again, we appreciate you giving us your time.
And always tuning in.
Yes.
And we want to hear what you got to say. And we may, you never know, we might change a whole format thing. I don't know, but Friday nights also people are going out. People families are getting together, things like that. So we realize it's kind of tough to have the attention of everybody. But we appreciate you for hanging in here. At any time you ever saw us, we want you to come back and find us, and let's do it again, as Marvin Gaye says.
All right. Have a good evening.
Take care, everyone.